What is going on, guys, and welcome to a brand new video. Today we're going to be talking about why Dragon Knight has a 45% win rate in pretty much all MMR brackets, and this was a video requested by one of my subscribers, so you know who you are. Thank you so much for enjoying this series on how I break down different heroes that have a pretty low win rate or some heroes that definitely should have a higher win rate. I think Dragon Knight is one of these heroes that definitely should have a higher win rate, but one of the things I feel like why this hero hasn't been popping off as much is because it's always been a very boring hero to play. Dota at the end of the day is a video game and it needs to be fun to play, and Dragon Knight isn't a very fun hero to play as he's just your typical blink stunner, and blink stunners this meta aren't very popular, as Centaur is not very popular. Axe is kind of popular in a sense, but more in pubs, but in Pro League it's not being played that much. I think that's one of the reasons, because Dragon Knight feels really solid, especially in the laning phase. He's always been very strong and very sustainable unless you're playing against a really bad counter matchup. Dragon Knight, especially from the mid lane, as I'm a mid laner, so I definitely play it on the mid lane. He is best versus Puck, Pangolier, Ember Spirit, and pretty decent against Tinker as well. It's a very strong laner. Every time Pango wants to go for a creep, you just stun him in the creep wave and he takes so much damage. There's really not much you can do about it, and you can pretty much kick him out of lane quite easily, as his swashbuckles don't really do anything to you as you have so much armor, and you can play extra greedy with your fire breath and pretty much max that out and completely kick him out of lane. You can either go for a soul ring or a bottle to sustain all this harass. I tend to go bottle, as when you're playing mid you will benefit much more from the bottle, but you can get a soul ring if you plan on being even more active or if you plan on taking stacks. I definitely like to play this hero very active, but I don't do a lot of stack taking. I like to make a lot of space on this hero and rush a blink dagger. It's pretty much the best way to play Dragon Knight from the mid lane. You definitely don't want to play him very greedy with like a Hand of Midas or something like that. You can go Maelstrom as well, but mostly the build that I like to go on is Power Treads, Blink, Manta style, Aghanim Scepter, and then you go for an AC or a BKB if you need it. You can even go for a Silver Edge as well. It honestly depends. In this gameplay I had an Alchemist, so I was guaranteed a free Aghanim Scepter, so I didn't really have to rush the Aghanim Scepter. It's a pretty strong power timing for the DK, but it's not an item that you want to rush, as it's not going to benefit you that much in the early to mid game. You can get that item later and get other things that you need much more, like the Blink Dagger for you to be able to blink stun and destroy supports in the backline. And your Dragon form is just so strong at taking towers, so it's very difficult for mid laners to contest you. So you're going to be forcing a lot of rotations on the map, and this hero is really good at that and very difficult to kill. So it's a lot of space for your carry or your offlaner who can be having a really rough lane as you're pressuring the mid lane tower. And if you're crushing the mid laner, then you're going to force even more rotations, sometimes up to 2 supports, and that's very big space and value, which very few mid laners can do, as ganking DK doesn't ever feel very good because he's just so tanky. It's going to require so many resources for you to get the kill, and if you don't get the kill, it feels incredibly bad as you're not shutting him down at all, and it's just very difficult and costs a lot of resources just to even attempt to go for a kill onto such a tanky hero. Typically DK is pretty bad against Slark, Necrophos, Shadow Demon, and Viper, among other matchups, but these are really bad for him as Viper breaks your passive and pretty much obliterates you. Not only that, he is a range hero, so you don't really put that much pressure onto him. He can pretty much do whatever he wants in the lane and completely destroy you. Necrophos is a hero that also kind of destroys you, as you're a strength hero, so his passive does a shit ton of damage to you, and you're very vulnerable to magic damage, so you're not really protected on that aspect. It becomes very difficult for you to lane against the Necrophos, and eventually he will kick you out of lane if he knows what he's doing. Even with your Dragon form, you don't pose much threat to the Necrophos, so you definitely need to be careful with these matchups. Slark is pretty much, if you're playing the DK on the off lane, it's a very bad matchup for the Dragon Knight, as Slark just wants to beat into you, and you don't really mind at first because early on the stacks don't do that much, but eventually once he has enough stacks, he's going to be able to rip you apart. You're going to have to max your Dragon's Blood and get as much armor as possible, and your Dragon Breath, but he can dispel that, so it's not really a big deal for the Slark. So it becomes a really big problem for you. He can purge the stun if he does it properly, and he has his Death Pact going. So overall, it's not a very fun matchup for the Dragon Knight. It's definitely not good, so don't recommend it. If you guys see a Slark, don't pick the Dragon Knight. It can still work if you have a really strong support in like a Lion or a Shadow Shaman, where it could kind of sway the matchup a little bit and they have a much more passive support like a Warlock, then you're definitely a little bit better. But if they have an aggressive support as well, you're kind of a little bit screwed on the Dragon Knight, so you definitely need to be careful with these matchups. And Shadow Demon, it's because his clones do so much damage to you when he disrupts you, especially when you're on Dragon form. The Dragon does so much damage, so it's very strong on the illusion part, and Shadow Demon will definitely always pick you. And if you go with a build like Radiance, he's definitely going to be picking you all the time, so you need to make sure you have your Radiance toggled when you're going to get into a team fight and the Shadow Demon is close by. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about Dragon Knight and why his win rate is so low? I definitely do think this hero needs a little bit more love. It needs a little bit more of a buff. I think it needs to do a little more damage. It would be nice if he was universal, as you can go for much better stat plays and different builds that would benefit this hero so much, but staying on strength, it's a little bit difficult as he doesn't compete super hard against the Nyx assassins of the world and these very toxic heroes. It becomes very difficult for this hero, but in the late game, this hero is no joke. With all your items and you are a 6-slotted Dragon Knight with like 4,000 or 5,000 HP, it becomes very difficult to kill this hero, especially from the mid lane. So you are very easy to get a lot of value from this hero, as it's very easy to play, very difficult to gank, pushes towers quite easily, and it has one of the best stuns in the game, and he's just your typical blink stunner and has very good last hit animation. So I definitely feel like this hero does need a little bit of a buff, but not really that much. I just think it needs to be picked a lot more. I think people don't enjoy playing this hero as much, and that's why his win rate is definitely lower than it should be. But definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd definitely like to know your opinion on why you think Dragon Knight has a low win rate. I definitely think this hero needs a little bit more love, as he's definitely very strong, but not being picked so much. I also think it's because Necro has been a pretty prevalent hero in the meta, and Bloodseeker as well, which Bloodseeker typically isn't a great matchup for the Dragon Knight, as you don't like being ruptured, and when he has his Aghanim Scepter, he does way too much magic damage for the Dragon Knight, and mostly a lot of magic lineups have been being played in this current meta, so that's why I guess DK has fallen off a little bit, as he's mainly good against physical lineups with his high armor and regen, but against magic lineups you don't really do that much. You're forced to buy a BKB to be able to initiate, so that could be one of the reasons as well. But mostly I just think this hero for most people is a little bit boring, so most people don't want to play it, especially from the mid lane. They want to play something a little more flashy like Invoker or Ember Spirit, but you have very reliable and very good matchups in the mid lane. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of heroes that you counter that are very difficult to counter in like Puck or Ember Spirit. These heroes that are very elusive, you have a very good time in lane, and you have a very good time overall in the game, as they can't really burst you or really do much to you. They tend to ignore you, and that's when you thrive on this hero, when people are ignoring you and you're just dishing out so much damage because they think you're just a tanky frontliner and you're not going to be able to do damage. Once you have your Aghanim Scepter and like a Maelstrom or a Monkey King Bar, you're going to be doing so much freaking damage on this hero. I even like to go Deso AC sometimes against high physical lineups. It's so strong. Sometimes you can 3-shot supports eventually. It's super strong, so it's very underrated. So I definitely feel like this hero is more on the underrated side and underpicked, rather than why this hero is terrible right now in the current meta. And if he does get a buff, I definitely feel like he can get a little bit of a buff. Maybe on his damage on his ultimate would be quite nice, or make him universal. I think that would be really good. He definitely doesn't need much to be prevalent in the meta, but I think a few things have to change, and just maybe add a different shard that's a lot more fun to play with. Not sure what they could do, because the shard is just fireball. It's kind of boring. You just drop it there. It's AoE. It's good for farm and good for a team fight, but it's very boring. So maybe if they could add a flashier shard would be kind of nice. Would make this hero a little bit more interesting to play for most players. But I definitely feel like that's the main problem, as people don't really want to play this hero that much, as he's quite basic, quite boring. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. I like it, would be much appreciated. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.